Hi there. I have decided to share some opinions with those whom would come to this channel to listen to them. They are simple, only a minimum of critical sense. And that because, unfortunately, things are so distorted that evidences that we can see there outside of transcendent importance are being passed by without looking at them. And instead, lies and distortions that have no validity whatsoever have been assumed and assimilated. These distortions are not in our favor, nor to facilitate a greater understanding of each other, but quite the opposite. They have been and are irrational separators that make the majority of conversations between people a bunch of nonsense, something assembled with things accepted and not questioned, whose basis is false. And I'll start at the beginning. What we are introduced from childhood referred to beliefs, which are established in the air, in a tender mind, and begin to shape the limitations between which we will be configuring ours. And the principle, at least in this part of the world, mediated by Christianity, began, they tell us, with Genesis. Well, let's start there. We are told that a God, an extraterrestrial, whom we cannot qualify like that, even though is what he is, since he is not and was not terrestrial or from Earth, because the Earth did not exist until he created it, isn't it? We can call him a father in heaven, which is not true. He is not our father, nor is he in heaven. If he wants to be called a geneticist, that could be accepted, but his fatherhood is out of place. I particularly do not accept it, nor does he, which is why he sent his son to earth, because he had none here, I would say. And we can say that he is in heaven, but not that he is an extraterrestrial, although the heavens are extraterrestrial, literally. These are some of those accepted and unquestioned things that leave us at the height of a four-legged animal. But let's continue with this beginning. In that book, it is said that he created a man and from his rib a woman, and he told them not to eat from the tree of the forbidden fruit. Oh, you know what follows. Accepting that as a hypothesis, what crosses me in a bad way is the fact that neither Adam nor Eve could have been born knowing languages, not one language. Therefore, the first thing that is revealed is that this alien lacked the slightest capacity to empathize, to put himself in the place of those creatures that he had supposedly created. Had he not even had a little, he would have realized that the two creatures did not understand the sound that the individual was letting out of his mouth. And therefore, not only did they not fail to comply with the instructions received, but they did not understand them. And there was not any intention on either side of disobeying them. Supposedly, he created two creatures in his image and likeness, and should, according with that, have given to them the possibility that he himself had to learn from his parents and from his social environment. So a language and a lot of things that we all learn in this way. What to eat or not to eat, how things are called, trees, fruits, how to protect themselves from the cold at night, or how to protect themselves from wild animals when they wander around hungry. What were they, men and a woman? What they were called? What are the names? And what are they for? Where they were living? Why they were there? And what was expected of them? Continuing with that hypothesis, the alien that left them there in a garden, not knowing what to eat or how to solve their most elementary needs, he was irresponsible, an individual without common sense, or the creatures that he created were not what he expected to have created, or he was someone so evil that he left them in a trap from which the only way out was with a fire sword, without consideration, and to go to work. And that of putting them to work seems to have been the intention from the very beginning, because given the circumstances, it was a matter of time, with a snake or without the snake, that the creatures would have eaten of the fruits that had been forbidden, because the instructions were verbal when they didn't understand a word in any language. But precisely the invention of a sin which expelled them from the paradise is nothing but a very bad excuse to justify the destiny that awaited those two creatures. That it was pure and simple a slavery. I am applying here a simple logical sense. The fact that even by chance there was a talking snake in the garden, in charge of putting the forbidden fruit at their fingertips. Speaking and reasoning is diabolical because neither Adam or Eve spoke or understood any language. Leaving aside the fact that the snake of Eden is one of the very few talkative snakes that is recorded throughout the history of humanity, it is already bad faith to use a language spoken and unknown by the couple to impute to innocence of a disobedience that never took place, and thus give the opportunity to the evil creator of creatures to throw them into the world of a slavery that was since the beginning their destiny, all along, with other creatures created supposedly by other aliens. That is confirmed when Cain later goes to the lands of Nod, where there are other people, and no one explains where these people came from or who created them. But if we believed in that Genesis, what derives from the existence of these other people is that other creatures were created, and who or whom created them could not be from Earth, because the Earth had just been created, just like this. There is much more and much worse. From what is seen, that creator of creatures was quite lazy, because if what he wanted was to create a new race, what less than to create at least 10 or 12 or 20 men or women to give them the opportunity to procreate a healthy race. As a result of that laziness, we cannot assume that we are descendants of that initial couple, as we are told, because Adam and Eve have had three sons without a reproductive system. That is, there is no possibility that human beings are descendant of that couple, even if the two surviving sons did things with mom. And I know how that sounds like. But I mention it because even if that had happened, the biological degeneration would have ended the race created after several generations. And if Cain procreated with a woman in the lands of Nod, what comes from it is a mix of a species or races created by another god, or gods, or aliens coming from outside, that is, extraterrestrials. This explained like this, or in any other way, falls by its own weight, but cannot be said like this. The whole account of the expulsion of Eden cannot be anything other than a manipulation to justify the slavery to which the human race has been subjected to, based on a sin that was never committed. It is just the excuse. By blaming the first created creatures of something huge, those beings were left no choice but to pay for the sin and wait for forgiveness. And it was the payment of that sin what was pursued with the whole invention. That way, it was obtained submissive, for free, and forever workforce. That submission has benefited the ruling class, that of those chosen by those aliens, with the intervention and help of ecclesiastical organizations, and therefore the publication of that book, whose doctrine was imposed upon sword force, torture, and killings, was convenient to them. The shame for their nakedness, a reaction derived from having eaten a fruit that supposedly made them wiser, can only be another unacceptable and impossible invention where there were not people dressed around, or even the notion of dressing. There it is shown, and a lot, an outdated manipulation practiced in this text to introduce a morality that could never have existed in those beginnings. It existed at the time when the first Bible was published, and those who were responsible for publishing that book fall into the inconsistency of introducing in it the uses and customs of the time when it came to light, which takes away divinity and credibility and transforms that and so many other texts of that book into an assembling construction that can only be believed by covering your eyes, ears, and your understanding. Another aspect to consider, and this is awful, is the fact that that diabolical creator of creatures reproduces a man and a woman to procreate with the same science as that used by a farmer, putting a horse and a mare together. without considering that the beings that he had created, supposedly in his image and likeness, should have had the possibility of choosing with whom they met to reproduce. That is, in other words, he considered them as an animal species to reproduce by copulation between female and male without emotion, feelings, or rationality. The use and abuse of a sin that couldn't happen to assign the woman a subordinate position to the man is one of those injustices that must be rectified once and for all, as it should be rectified the whole invention created to condemn the human race to a life of slavery forever. That includes working to pay for your food and roof to this day. That God, they tell us, sent his Son to forgive the sins of man, that is, to eat fruit from a tree. This, which sounds absolutely brutal, is what follows from the episode I mentioned, and that extraterrestrial God, so tyrant, sends his Son, they tell us, to be tortured and killed to forgive those grave sins that, in the eyes of that God, can only be forgiven with blood, torture, and death of innocence. I say it in plural because there was not only one crucifixion, but many. And he sends his Son because here the extraterrestrial God had no son. And this is important because it clearly shows that no matter how many people call him a father, he does not consider anyone in this world his children, according to these divine writings. But also, and with regard to this particular point, I would like to record that this alien is not my father. And if he is yours, maybe you should have a confidential conversation with your mother. And this is not a joke. This is one more of those things accepted, not questioned, that should not only be questioned, but eliminated, because he is not our father. Regarding that submission from women to men, and from men to work, and to a superior being who must obey or suffer eternal punishments if he disobeys, suited so well to the powers that were responsible for establishing those false principles and beliefs, forcing the imposition of this doctrine to the populations they were submitting, because they transformed the human being into an obedient and frightened slave, subjected to others, forced to work, waiting for forgiveness that has never come, despite crucifixions and bloodthirsty episodes that were supposed to forgive them, and that, for what it seems, they have not been counted for. Because here we are, working to live, while others, the chosen ones, receive a life of luxury for the simple fact of having been supposedly born from the same sinful couple. That is another injustice that has gone very well for a few that had been loaded on the backs of the rest of us, and that to justify that privilege, they expanded the beliefs that suited them more, imposing on beings that did not have knowledge or education no other possibility but working for their food and their roof, There are many other ways to live a life here, much fairer, healthier, more natural, and with more freedom. The brainwashing has worked so well that most people are not even able to think on any other way of living other than this one. And this is a huge problem because those that can see a better way, we are being dragged by a majority of people who neither think for themselves nor do anything to change so much wrong. Because by not calling things by their name, they follow the path more convenient to those who are loaded on our backs and believe that this avoids problems. And everyone is doing this until the problems are at the doorstep of their house and not before. Then they wonder, how is it possible that what happens to them is even possible? I've only used a little common sense here, to identify things that we shouldn't accept, things that just don't fit, that are not credible, whoever says them, and whatever the titles has who says them. And finally, for today, I would like to remind you of that definition that says that human beings are a rational being composed of soul and body. Consequently, any philosophy, religion, or education which establishes the need not to think but to only believe or just to have faith to be part of it, simply it is not addressed to human beings because human beings or are rational or they are not human, just like this. If you think you can entertain your mind and hear things that may be contrary to your beliefs, and just think about them, here you will find a person dedicated to do that, to better understanding, to understand a reality that neither convinces me nor consider I immutable or respectable. Because just to mention only one of the consequences of that lack of action and understanding, or of not getting into problems, which is just self-serving, instead of going against so many evils committed daily, let me put just a bit of it in your plate that I hope will be as horrible for you as it is for me. An average of 8 million children disappear every year. Some reappear, but they are no longer the same that they were. Most are raped and killed. The children's trade is moving billions. There are so many that feel better just by saying that this figure is not that huge. But please, do your own research and you will see. So, the first thing should be to open your eyes and see what is really happening. And the second, to ask yourself how any of it can be changed. Even if you haven't lost any of your children, because leaving things as they are makes it sure that it is just a matter of time that any of it can happen to you, to your grandchildren, or sons, or the kids or grandkids of your neighbor. I would say goodbye here by now, but I will return as soon as I can to share more things with you. Subscribe if you think you can benefit from some rational and critical exercise.